Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to yet another Unity and Bolt visual scripting tutorial. My name is John, otherwise known as Megahertz, and today I have something special for you. I first want to say that I cannot believe I already got 100 subs. It has been so awesome watching the response I've been getting from posting these videos, and in complete honesty, while it feels nice to have people interested in what I'm doing, I've really just had a blast working with Bolt and making videos. So 100 subs is just the icing on the cake. But as my way of saying thank you to all you guys who helped me get there, I have something special for each of you that I will showcase at the end of this video. Today's tutorial comes by special request from Sri Shank Rao, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, who asked for a tutorial on how to change a character using Bolt visual scripting. He also asked for a melee attack, and I will post that very soon. And while I don't always take special requests, figuring out how to change a character using Bolt and visual scripting really sounded like a lot of fun to me, so I thought I'd give it a shot. So let me just very quickly set up the scene for you. It's very simple. I just have a background with 2 players in it, and on these players I have a rigid body box collider, an animator with basically 3 very simple animations set up. I have an idle animation with a moving parameter that says if it's moving, it goes to walk. If it's not moving, it goes back to idle. And I'll show you this last one here in just a second because that one's kind of special. I also have on my players, on both of them, I have a flow machine that's set up with not only does it have a speed variable on it, but it also has a very simple movement macro that I set up in video 2 of my 2D player controller. You can go check that video out if you'd like to know how to make this and how exactly it works. But basically, whenever I press play, I just have 2 characters that both respond to keyboard input whenever I go left and right. Now, the animations aren't that great, but, you know, whatever. I made these myself, so I'm an amateur. But anyway, what I want to show you is a way that I can actually select from one player to the next. So what we're going to need to do in order to set up our players that we can select between the 2 of them is we need to give them tags. So if you look on player 1, I have a player 1 tag. And on player 2, I have a player 2 tag. So go ahead and set that up. We're also going to need an object to kind of just manage our players. So I right-clicked, created an empty object, and I named that Player Manager. I gave it a flow machine, and inside this, I just left it embedded instead of just making a new macro. You can do whatever you want, but I just set up a very simple macro here that whenever I click with my mouse button on the game object that's got the tag player 1, I'm going to set enabled on the flow machine, so it's going to check this little check mark on that player, and then it's going to uncheck the flow machine on the other player. So player 1 it's going to enable, player 2 it's going to disable. So whenever I click on the player 2 game object, I have it doing just the opposite. So this is going to allow me to be able to select between player 1 and player 2. So as I start up my game here, you should see that both of them move back and forth. Whenever I click this object right over here, the player 1, it stops moving the player 2, and vice versa. Whenever I click player 2, player 1 stops moving. And this is really cool. Maybe this is exactly what you're looking for, but personally I felt like, you know, I just wanted to know when I was going to be able to click on my character, because sometimes it doesn't register. So for example, I click on the shield, I just clicked and it's just not working. So I need to know whenever my mouse is actually hovering over the character. So in order to accomplish this, I basically set up in the very same player manager macro. I just kind of went down a little bit, and I said when mouse over on player 1, when you mouse over the character, I want it to grow in size and set the bool to selected, and I'll explain what that means in just a second. Whenever I leave, I want it to return in its size. So these are just very quick macros that I set up that basically it gets the position or the direction of the scale, and it just increases it by 0.05 on the X and the Y, and positive or negative, which is why I have the direction. I don't want it to be facing left and for me to hover over it and it to all of a sudden flip. So I had to figure out which direction it was facing. So that's basically what it's doing in grow size and in return size. So just in return size, it's the same thing except for it sets it back to a scale of 1 and -1 depending on which direction it's facing. It also has a selector or a bool, animator bool, that it's selected, and it sets that to true. So I have that very same thing here, and inside my animator, I have idle and walk going to selected. They both can go to selected, and the way that they do that is basically If selected is true, then it will go to select start. That is the way on both of them. I have exit time turned off on both of those. And the only way, and by the way, I have this one right here, the loop is turned off. So all it does is just lift its arm, and whenever it's done, whenever selected is not true, so when it's selected is false, it goes to select in, where it just kind of lowers its arm. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. And it's immediately after it's done, it either goes to walk or idle back on the animation. So what this does is just player one is saying, hey, are you scrolling over player one? So whenever I have my little mouse over the unit, it should grow and it should lift its arm. You see that, how it kind of popped in size? And whenever I leave, it just kind of lowers its arm. Same thing for player two. So it lets me know that, hey, you're clicking on me, or you're able to click on me. So that's just kind of a helpful way to know exactly when I'm scrolling over an object that I can click on now. And I think selecting between two players is great. But why stop there? Why not have a selection process for as many units as we like? Well, in order to accomplish this, we really need to get away from using the tag system. I mean, could you just imagine how ridiculous this system would get every time you add another player to select between? I mean, on your screen, this is just for player one. We'd have to set this up for every single player that we add. Sheesh. So instead of using tags, let's just make a list and use that. Here you have a new scene with 4 new players in it. They are set up exactly the same way as the previous scene. In order to be able to use all of these characters with a list, what we're going to have to do is go to our player manager, and what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add a new variable to it. Just call it players and make it a list of game objects. And once you get that established, just go ahead and, hit the plus sign, as many players as you have, and just grab your player and just drag it in and drop it. Once you get that set up, you're going to want to go to your player manager and just delete everything inside the player manager, or you can create a new player manager. So you can just right click and create empty, create a new player manager if you like, name it whatever you want. And then you're going to set up this macro just like this. And let me just explain basically what this is doing. So on our player manager, we have this list of game objects. You can just grab this right here and you just drop it right there. And what it's doing is when we click down, it's going to look in this list and see all of these players that we have in this list. And then it's going to do a for each loop. For every object in that list, it's going to turn off the flow machine. And for that particular one that we clicked on, which there's a lot of green lines, but they're all pretty much coming from the same source and going into each one of these objects. For the one that we clicked on, it's going to set enabled. The rest of these are going to set disabled. When we mouse over a unit, for the one that we're mousing over, it's going to grow that unit in size, and it's going to leave the rest of them alone. It's going to set the selected bool as true, and when you exit, it selects it as false. So basically, this is a very simple way to have our units to where when we just click on that one unit, or whenever we mouse over that one unit, that it shows as that object in the list. So let me click right here. Okay, so it's saying, now right now, I think I can move all of them. Yeah, I can move all of them. And whenever I click over it, or I hover over it, they should all lift their hand, which they do. And whenever I click on that one particular one, I should be able to move that one, and the rest of these should stay exactly where they were. Again, the animations aren't that great, so I do apologize for that. But it does work. So whenever you click each one of these objects, it works perfect. Great. So now we have the ability to select between 4 players, and that's awesome. But why stop there? What if I don't want to use a mouse click, but a button instead? Also, wouldn't it be cool to have the camera follow the player that I have selected and smoothly change whenever I switch? Well, in order to accomplish that, we're going to need to make a few adjustments. Here is a brand new scene with 4 new players in it. They are set up exactly the same way as the players in the previous scene. And there's one major difference between that scene and this one, and that is that I'm using Cinemachine in this one with a virtual camera. If you don't have Cinemachine, you need to get it. It is awesome. You can use it right out of the box. Just go to Window, go to Package Manager, and right here on the left, just click on All Packages and scroll down until you find Cinemachine, download and install that. And once it's installed, we have one more thing to do so that we can call Cinemachine in a Bolt flow macro in the graph. So going to Tools, Bolt, Unit Options Wizard, just under assembly options, go all the way down to the bottom, hit the little plus sign, and add Cinemachine. You can do that by just typing in Cinemachine. Once you have that in, hit next, and then go down to the bottom of this one and hit generate, and it will generate a new list of things that it can call inside the graph. Once you have that set up, we're going to need to install a virtual camera. The way you do that is just clicking on Cinemachine right here and hit create virtual camera. It will automatically add a brain to your main camera. And then it will have, this is your camera that it's actually controlling everything. This is what it's referring to. This pops up in your list, and you might have to make just a few adjustments to this. I had to adjust the Y just a little bit. Everything else I left the same. And under follow, I have it actually looking at player 3 right now to kind of keep the screen centered. But this is what we're going to make adjustments to. We're going to change the Cinemachine virtual camera's follow from player 3 or player 1 to whatever player is getting selected. In order to do this, we're going to need to go to our player manager and add yet another variable. You're going to add one called index. It's going to be an integer, and you're going to set it to the value of 0. Just a special note about lists, something you might know, you might not. We have 4 objects in the list here, but whenever we call this inside a macro, we are going to have to refer to number 1 as 0. The list starts at 0 for some reason. Whoever came up with that, I want to punch them in the mouth, because sometimes that can be confusing. Start with 0, 1, 2, 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the list count, and if it ever gets to 4, it's going to reset it back to 0. So 0 is where you start, 0, 1, 2, 3. The next thing we're going to need to do is create a new flow macro. I named mine Selector FM for Selector Flow Machine. What this is doing is basically accomplishing that very same thing that we were looking at in the last video, except for one exception. It has its set enabled on Flow Machine, and basically this is all working the same way. But the thing that's really different in this is that it is setting the Cinemachine virtual camera set follow. Remember that follow field that we had right up here? That it's setting this field right here to whatever character we select in our list. In order to find this, 2 things. You're going to need to put a tag on your virtual camera. I just named mine virtual camera so I can find that object with tag. But in order to find this in the flow graph, you actually have to type in Cinemachine virtual camera, and then you can hit set follow. So you pretty much have to type in the whole thing just to get that one unit. I know that's really annoying, but that is where you find it. So then what I have it doing is I have it growing in size, and then for like 0.05 seconds it waits, and then it returns its size. So what I'm doing is I've actually taken out that entire animator where they lift up their hand, or the animation where they lift up their hand. So now under my player manager, if I can go up 1, I have this set up. So remember we set up that index integer. What that's doing is it's saying on keyboard input, I just have it set to the tab button. Whenever I press tab, if that index number is greater or is equal to 4, then it is going to set the index, this number right here, back to 0. And whatever that index number is, that's going to be the number on our list that we're counting. Remember, I told you it goes 0, 1, 2, 3. Well, that's how we're actually manipulating that. And when it starts, so I have a start event and a keyboard event are both coroutines, because remember, there is a little wait time right here just to kind of give us that little pop effect that you have selected that player. You don't have to have that in there. I just kind of felt that was a nice touch. And once it's done with that selection, that it selected the characters, it's disabled all the flow machines on all the other ones, but selected that one, and it has that little pop effect, then it adds 1 to the index, so that now we can cycle through our players, and when we get to the end of the list, remember, because 0, 1, 2, 3, if it goes to 4, it's just going to reset it back to 0. So now we should have our characters to where, hey, I've selected this one, and it can move around. If you notice, it did a little pop effect there, but also the camera moves on it. So when I select it, you should see it grow a little bit, and then it kind of go right back down. So I can just walk it right over here and go right back over there, and it smoothly transitions between the 4 of them. So now we should have a character selection between 4 players using the tab key and a camera that follows whatever character we have selected. But why stop there? What if you have several functions on a player and you don't necessarily want to disable the flow machine on it? Or even better, what if you have an NPC AI on the character so that if you're not personally controlling it, it has a mind of its own? Here I have a new scene with 4 new players that are set up exactly the same way as the previous scene, with one major exception. Each one of these players, instead of having a flow machine on them, each of them has a state machine. Inside each player's state machine, I just drug the movement macro that we had originally on them inside, and then I right-clicked and I created a new super state called NPC. I then right-click on that and hit toggle start, because that's what it's going to start with. And then I right-click one more time, and I made a transition from NPC to movement, and then I right-clicked on movement and made one more transition from movement to NPC. From the NPC to movement macro, the transition there, I just set up a custom event called PC, and then I triggered the transition, and from this one, I named that one NPC, and there's one thing that we want to happen whenever we select our different characters. We want that character to stop moving unless it's being told to by the NPC brain. I then set up 2 new macros, one called AI Change Mind. This on interstate is a coroutine, and basically what you do is every 1 to 3 seconds it's going to change its mind, and we'll implement that in just a second. The other one is called AI Walk. This is it's got an input with direction that we're going to plug into it, and basically what it does, it just multiplies that by the speed and just sends it in a direction that it's supposed to go. It flips the x-axis, flips the scale on the x-axis depending on which direction it's facing, and then it just sets the velocity to move in a particular direction. Going back to the root state machine, we are going to now click on NPC, and inside that you should see a flow macro that just says start or something like that. Just go ahead and rename that idle and delete everything inside of that. We are then going to make another flow machine or flow state. Just right click, hit create flow state, name that walk right, and do it one more time for walk left. We're then going to make a transition from idle to walk right, transition from walk right to idle, from walk right to walk left back to walk right, and walk left to idle, idle back to walk left. Once you get those done, you're going to change the macro that it has actually sitting right here. You're just going to grab this AI Change Mind, and then you're going to put it right here, and it's going to say replace with AI Change Mind. You're going to do that on all 6 of those transitions. Once you get that done, you're going to go inside your idle, and you're just going to grab your AI Walk and just drag it in there and drop it. Use the update event, so right click, add an update event, just leave the direction to 0, and then to the right here, you're going to set the bool moving to not true. So set that to false. On the other 2, so the walk left, you're going to take the direction, and you're going to have that as a -1. By the way, if you don't see that as you create your directions, so for example, you don't have that, the reason why is whenever you set your value input, you have to have this has default value box checked. And then when you go outside of your macro, you should see that number. So just type in a -1, so that's going to make it move left on the x-axis because it goes negative. Set the animator bool moving to true on that. And on walk right, you're going to do the same thing, except for this one is going to be positive. You're then going to have to create one more macro. Right-click, create a bolt flow macro, and then name it Selector CEs. This is for Selector Custom Event. We're going to use custom events to trigger these things. So go ahead and set this up just like you see in your screen. This is an integer, so when you put that on the input, it's going to be an integer. You don't have to do the default value since that is actually going to be plugged in. And the reason we're running this out is because I believe outside of this output, this whole macro, we're going to output the one that is selected and use it somewhere else. So basically what this is doing, for each object in this list, our players list, we are triggering the NPC custom event, and then we are going to grow its size on the one that we have selected just very, very quickly. I believe that's a 0.05 on that unit, and then it's just going to return its size. And on that one that is selected, we are going to trigger the player controlled that we had set up on those objects. So it's going to trigger to where we now have control over that one unit. Going back to our player manager, we are going to take advantage of that selector CE by go ahead and setting up this right here. This is the last thing that you need to set up. This is, both of these, again, these are coroutines. It's very similar to the same thing that we had. Now this is why we had that little index object coming out of the selector CE, so that we take care of all this, and at the very end, after all of that's taken care of, we're gonna add one to the index. So let's go ahead and test it and just see. We should have all of our players just wandering around on their own. And you do see that they're just kind of walking. They are butting into each other, but at least not only are they walking around on their own, I can press tab and I can select and change and take advantage of using these units however I want. Now, this is a very, very, very simple AI that's set up on these guys. They're so dumb, they just walk into each other, and that's all they do is just kind of wander around. But just imagine the different ways you can implement something like this. When I was building it, I was just imagining something like, you know, a real-time strategy game like Warcraft or Age of Empires. Honestly, I'm super excited to see what you guys come up with implementing something like this. Either way, you should now have 4 ways to change and select your characters. But just before you go, as my way of saying thank you to all those who have subscribed to my channel, I've included a link to this project file as well as all the original Adobe Illustrator files that went into this project. You can go in and you can make changes to these as you see fit. For example, if you want a red engineer instead of a blue, and you just kind of go through and change all the blue parts. I've included all of the characters as well as all of the backgrounds with the background assets. Just to head off any questions you might have about these files, yes, I created them from scratch, and I'm giving you permission to use them however you see fit, commercially or otherwise. This is not only my way of saying thank you for subscribing, but thank you for the amazing response that I have gotten from creating these videos. It has been a pleasure. Thank you again for subscribing to my channel. This has been a public service announcement from your very appreciative neighborhood Megahertz. Peace.